Hi everyone, welcome to the Swift Arcade. I'm your host, Jonathan Rasmussen. Last episode, we took a look at how to do some basics around core data. We saw how to create new entities in core data, how to add them to our SwiftUI projects, and then basically just how to do some very simple things like updating, creating, deleting, and doing all sorts of good things with basics around core data. What we're going to do in this episode is we're going to expand our original example here and modify it to actually do one-to-many relationships with another entity called employees. So here, for example, we could add new employees to our companies. We can have multiple employees with our companies. And in this episode, we're going to see how to set up a one-to-many relationship between entities in core data. So we're going to start off right where we left off in the last episode. For those of you who weren't with us, I'll leave a link in the show notes so you can go watch that if you want to see how to set up some basics around core data. But basically we have a persistence container here. This is how we get access to our view context, which we need for core data. Then in our application, we just pass that in via an environment variable. So this is how we pass in core data into our SwiftUI project. And then we've just got a couple of views here, one called content view, which basically, again, we inject in our managed object context. And this is just standard SwiftUI stuff. We have a fetch request here that gets all of our companies. Then we have a navigation view, which we're embedded in. And then just some text fields and buttons to basically add new companies, take that information, create new companies and entities. And then we can do things like add. We can delete by swiping right here. And then if we want to click on and see more details, we can do that by clicking on a particular company. And here we will go and see something called an update view, which has a state object representing that company, in this case, Apple. And then if we hit this little sign here and we do an update, that's how we'll go ahead and change the company name. So that's where we're going to start. Okay, so to do this, we're going to do it in 3 steps. First, we're going to update the core data model to support that one-to-many relationship between a company and its employees. Then we're going to modify the model to work better with the UI because as we're going to see some challenges when it comes to hooking those up. And then finally, we're going to update the UI to work with our new core data model. So let's start by updating the model. Let's go into our intro core data model here. This is where we set up the relationships between companies and employees. Let's add a new entity here. Let's call it employee. And let's give it just the same attributes we had for company. Let's give it a name. We'll make it a string. I'm going to make it non-optional, although in core data, everything kind of is optional, as you'll see. And now here comes the interesting part. How do we connect this employee to this company? Well, this is where this relationship section comes in. We're going to come down here and we're going to create a relationship between an employee and a company. And starting with employee, we're going to say that an employee can have a company. And the destination here is what entity do we want to hook this up to? We're going to hook it up to company. And for now, we're just going to leave this with no inverse. And this is just how we're going to set up this relationship between the employee and the company. And then I'm going to hit Command S, which is something we want to do a lot when working with core data, just to get these files to save and get them rebuilt behind the scenes so we can use them in our projects. Now, you'd think we're done, but this is one of the things with a one-to-many relationship with core data. We actually need to set up the reverse relationship between a company and an employee. So we'll come back up to company here, and we'll add another relationship here. Here, the inverse of what we just did. Here we want to be able to say a company can have many employees. So this is just a variable we can give it here. We can call this whatever we want. I'm just going to call it employees. This destination here is going to go to employee. Now watch this. This no inverse thing is actually changed now. It picked up that employee has a relationship called company. We're going to select that, and that two-way binding between these is what's going to set up the relationship between the employee and the company. Just one more thing we need to do. We need to specify and tell core data that this is a one-to-many relationship. which we can do by coming over here, hitting this sidebar indicator here, selecting our company, and then down here you'll see we've got a couple of different options. If we click on our relationship, we want to change this under type where it says to one, we want to make that to many. That's what's going to make the relationship between companies and employees one to many. So if we do that, hit Command S, we've now got everything we need from a model point of view to actually use this relationship in our UI. So let's switch gears and now try to use this model in our UI. So the company detail or employee view we want to build is going to look like this. It's going to have a text box at the top where we can enter someone's name, hit save, and then add that as an employee to this company. So to do that, or in order to build this view, we're going to have to pass in a company so we know what company to associate these employees with. And then this is just standard SwiftUI stuff to actually do the UI to make that happen. So let's come over here, go Command N, let's create a brand new SwiftUI view. Let's call it company detail. And in here, I've got some code, which I'm just going to copy to save some time. But we'll go through this just so you understand what's going on. And basically, this is going to set up and allow us to build this view. We're going to pass in our view context through the environment variable here. That's kind of our data flow in this SwiftUI project. Here's the company that we're going to insist someone pass in when they create this view. We need to associate an employee with a company. We're going to make that a state object here. So when that changes, everything will refresh. And then employee name, this is a string, which is going to be tied to this text field here. So when someone changes or types in here, we're going to bind that to this state object here as an employee name. And this is just view stuff here. Here we've got a text field, which is just going to be associated with this. This plus button here is what we're going to see here using our SF symbols. This is just a standard image that comes bundled with us to get that plus. And then here we're going to have a nice list. We're going to loop through every employee in the company, display their name, and just include some extra functionality like the ability to do a swipe delete here. That's what this is doing, which is going to call this function. And when they hit the plus sign up here, you'll notice that we're going to call a function here called add employee. That's the magic, or that's how we're going to add an employee and actually do that one-to-many relationship between employee and company simply by creating a new employee with our view context, giving it the name that they've typed in here, and then we'll add that to our company and persist that in our context. So that's how it should work. Out of the box, all this should just magically work. But we've got a bit of a problem. Well, notice that if we come in here, we've got some errors in that SwiftUI doesn't really want to work with our core data model exactly how we've set it up. For example, if we come up here and click on this error message, it's saying cannot convert value of type NSSet optional to expected value of range int. That's a fancy way of saying that right now, behind the scenes, core data has set up relationships for us. In other words, employees know what companies are, but this is coming back to us as an NSSet. And what SwiftUI really wants here is something of type range, or in other words, it would really prefer it if this was an array. SwiftUI works great with arrays, not so great with NSSets, which is what's being returned to us from core data. So that's a problem. That's probably one of the trickiest things that come with marrying core data with SwiftUI. How do you line up this slight impedance mismatch between these two worlds? Well, let's shift gears now. Let's go back and let's do step 2 of what we talked about there, which was let's see how we can modify our model to work better with SwiftUI. The way core data works is it has this codegen facility where it automatically generates these files for you and enables you to use them so you don't have to type these out yourself when you're using them in your applications. And normally this is really nice, but in this case, we actually don't want that. because we want to modify the files that core data generates for us so we can give them some affordances so they can better work with our UI. So if we come over here and we take a look at company and employee, what we're going to see if we bring up the options over here is a little section here called Code Gen. And under here, you're going to see three options. Manual, which means you take responsibility for generating and maintaining these classes yourself. Class definition, which is the one by default. This is the one where SwiftUI automatically creates these for you and manages them for you. And there's kind of one that sits in between these. Category extension. This is one where core data will generate some files for you, but it will also enable you to generate a Swift extension where you can add some other capabilities if you want to enhance your generated core data object. We're going to come over here and we're going to choose manual none for both company and employee, meaning we're going to generate these ourselves. And the way to do that in Xcode is to come up to Editor, create NS object subclass. This is for our project intro. And then here we're just going to select the core data entities that we want to manually generate classes for. It'll ask us where we'd like to put them. I'm just going to come down here and select core data intro. So it just nests them inside our project. And if we hit create, watch what happens here. Boom, 4 files got generated. Let's take a look at these. We've got company. So this is an NS managed object. This is what core data is doing behind the scenes when it creates these things for you. There's a class called company. It's an NS managed object. Okay, that's interesting. But look at this. Here's the properties. Here we can see how core data actually sets this up for us in our project. Here's our fetch request generated for us for entity type company. Here's our attributes, name, and look at this one. Here's our employees. This is the one-to-many relationship we set up where we have many employees in a company, and look at its type, NS set. That's the problem. We can't hook up NS sets elegantly into SwiftUI. So we're gonna have to figure out how to do something there. And here's some other generated accessors for our employees. Here gave us a nice function to add 2 employees. So we can pass in an employee and add it. We can remove, and basically we can do that as a set. And this is what's going on behind the scenes when we work with core data and generate these things. Here's one called identifiable. This is really handy and important for SwiftUI. This is what enables us to uniquely identify this object when we're in a for each or some other kind of list generator in SwiftUI. And we've got the same thing for company or for employee. We've got an employee, and an employee has a name and a company is associated back to it, all as optionals. And you'll note these are optionals even though I chose not to make them optionals when we generated these entities. This is just a quirk in core data. Everything is optional in core data, even if you specify it as not. But don't worry, we're going to handle that too. So what I want you to do now, if you're following along here, is let's go ahead and let's start with the company. We'll modify that one first. Let's come up here and let's add some new code right underneath name and employees here. And let's just add the following. Let's add an unwrapped name variable called string. So instead of having to continuously unwrap our optional, we're going to do it right in here. We're going to return an unwrapped name of string, not optional string, where we'll just take the name, and if we've got it, we'll return it. Otherwise, we'll return unknown name. Then let's add another entity down here called employees array, and we'll have this return an array of employees. This is great because what we can do now is we can take our employee set, this employees, which is an NS set, next step set. This really comes from some older technology that's been around in iOS for years. We're going to convert that to a Swift set of type employee. And then we're going to take that and just go through and sort them out and take the unwrapped name and see which one is greater. We're basically going to alphabetize these and just return a sorted array here, which will be a lot nicer than working with NS set. Now don't worry if this initially doesn't compile, it doesn't know what unwrapped name is, we'll have to do a compilation. But that's how we're going to take company and make it much easier to work with. Unwrapped name and employees array. Okay, so with those changes now, let's go back to that. Where's our detail view? Oh, there it is. I'm just going to bring this up here to have everything grouped together. And let's just try going Command B, Command R. We're going to try to get it to compile. And hopefully now we'll see that because we've generated these files, company, oh yes, we'll have to change this. This isn't company employees now. This is going to be employees array. So that's how we're going to access our employees array. And look, I can even Control Command click, and we'll go to that generated file now that we've got in our project. And then Control Command left arrow to go back. Okay, so that's great. Instead of employee name here, we can go employee unwrapped name. Let's use that. Much nicer. And again, if I Control Command click, I can go and see that that's now hooked up to our employee unwrapped name, which we just added there. That's great. And if there's anything else, no, everything else here looks great. Let's just take a look at the preview. I'm going to go Command Enter to get that, Option Command Enter to get our preview up over here. And I've also set up some preview data down here in the bottom. So this is how I can set up and get the core data preview, which we covered in the last episode. This is a special preview container and a special view context where we can use some core data right in our own SwiftUI views without using the real core data view context behind the scenes. So just a convenient way for us to create a view context, add some employees, add them to our company, and now we've got a couple of employees with our company, and we can say, hey, this looks like it's kind of laid out and working. Can hit the play button here, can add a new employee if we like, and great, this is all hooked up and working. Now all we need to do is use company detail in our original content view. So if we come over to content view, instead of displaying a update view, let's change this to our new company detail. And that takes a company as an argument, and we should be able to pass that in like that. I'm just going to go Command R to run, and let's just see what this does. Okay, here we go, companies. So we can go into a company. We can see that there are not any employees here. Let's add a few. Peter, Paul, Mary, and hey, this is pretty nice. We've now got employees tied to companies, and if we click around and we stop the simulator and we run it again, it should remember that we do indeed have those employees associated with those companies, and everything should just work, which it does. Awesome. Okay, one more bonus tip before we wrap up. Something that's nice when you're working with core data is if you've got an application and someone puts it in the background, it'd be nice if you actually saved whatever data you had in flight before you accidentally closed it, and maybe because the simulator shut down your application in the background, you forgot to save your core data instance. There's something really nice you can do in the scene of your project. If you go to the app level, the highest level view in your project, something you can add in there is an environment variable called scene phase. What this does is this injects a scene phase object into your app here, and then what you can do is you can react to that basically when your scene phase changes and you go into the background. So in our window group here, what we can do is go on change, and basically what this is doing is it's saying, hey, if anything changes about our scene phase here, go ahead and call our persistence controller and just save the context. So if we go into the background now, while we've got something maybe partially saved, this will actually save it, and just, it's a nice little affordance to build into your project to basically make sure you don't lose any context from your core data if your app does go into the background. Just a little tip on how to make your app a little more production ready. Okay, well there you have it, folks. Some quick tips on how to set up a one-to-many relationship in core data working with SwiftUI. The main learning here for me was that we can generate these core data files ourselves. core data by itself doesn't perfectly line up with SwiftUI. There's a lot of magic that Apple's put in there, like the fetch request, which does really make our lives a lot easier. But sometimes we need to jump in there, tweak a few things, like convert NS sets into arrays, and that will more nicely line up our core data with our SwiftUI apps. I'm working on an app myself. This is something I needed to figure out. So I'm hoping that this is going to make my life easier when I go to use core data in my projects, and hopefully this will also work with you and yours. Hope you liked the video. If you do hit like, do hit subscribe, come on back, and we'll continue exploring really interesting problems and cool things in SwiftUI and all things related to iOS. All right, take care everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.